So transitions are hard for every child, but with an ADHD brain, they are really, really hard. So meltdowns are very common. So one thing that you can do for transitions is really try to set clear expectations and have, set your kids up for success, like whatever the transition may be. Like,
hello and welcome back to the Ignition Path Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Goodknight. Before we get into the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Make sure that if you're listening to this and our guest or I say anything that resonates with you or anybody else that you know, don't forget to hit that share button and just push it right out to that friend of yours to get them to hear this conversation and the content that we create here on the Ignition Path Podcast. So I'm excited to talk to you today about Kristina Manning. She is my guest today, and she's got a great discussion about her path through entrepreneurialism. And, I said that really well that time. A lot of times I fumble that. So I'll go ahead and let Kristina introduce herself and go ahead and introduce yourself and then just talk about like what you did prior to becoming an entrepreneur or when you thought maybe you could be an entrepreneur. Talk about that path, and then don't go all the way into what you're doing now. We'll get into that later, but just let's talk about that path that got to where you are for now.
Absolutely. So in my former life, I was a classroom teacher. I taught third grade for a while, and then I got my master's in school counseling. And during the pandemic, as it turned into a mental health crisis for pretty much all adults and kids, yes. It was a very, very striking to see how many kids, especially with ADHD, were really, really struggling. I mean, every child struggled during the pandemic, but kids with ADHD thrive on routine and structure. And so when they had to start learning at home, it was just incredibly difficult. And so a lot of parents were reaching out to me and they were like, Kristina, how do I support my ADHD kid at home? They're having meltdowns daily, and being out of the routine is really, really tough. So that was pretty much the catalyst for what made me create my brand, Calm Minds. And so now I won't get into it too much, but I am a parent coach for kids of ADHD.
So you're a parent coach. Do you actually coach the children as well, or just the parents to help them manage it?
Mainly the parents, because it always starts with the parents. I give them lots of tips and we create routines, and I really help the parents because a lot of times parents who have a recent diagnosis with their child with ADHD, they really have no idea how an ADHD brain works and the best and most effective ways to support them. So,
right.
Yes.
Well, and that's it. I have an ADHD child as well, and he's 23 now, just as of yesterday. So, 2 days ago, the 29th. So he turned 23 on the 29th, and we diagnosed him through official means back when he was probably in 6th or 7th grade, right around there. And it was pretty unique because I'm learning disability. I've had a learning disability my entire life. So I was probably ADHD prior to, and probably would have had one of those, what do they call them when they have a program?
An IEP or a 504 plan?
IEP, yeah.
IEP,
I would have easily been labeled in the IEP program. I had special tutors growing up all the way through elementary and junior high. High school was more of I actually went to separate classes. I'd go to my homeroom class and then I would leave for the day, come back at lunch and recess, and then come back at the end of the day. So I was pretty outcasted in the beginning before any of this stuff. I mean, we're talking, 70s and early 80s. I was graduating in 1990. So, we're talking about, thank goodness my mom and dad moved me to a school district that actually had proper, education path for this, but it wasn't called IEP back then. So,
right.
But, by the time I got in high school, I had all the people that used to pick on me want me to help them study, because what my learning disability did through my back then IEP back then was taught me how to study. And, when we got Carter diagnosed with ADHD, and through the process of that, since I was never labeled ADHD, I remember sitting with the doctor, and as he's going through and talking about Carter and all the things that he's telling us about how his diagnosis came, I look over at my wife, and my wife looks over at me, and I'm like, and she's pointing at me and I'm pointing at myself. I'm like, oh my God, I'm ADHD, let alone learning disability, let alone letting let alone learning disabled. I mean, I'm successful. Like, you know, I've had multiple businesses. I'm a podcaster. I'm a voiceover actor. I'm a paramedic. I mean, it hasn't slowed me down.
No.
I mean, I save people's lives for a living, so I'm not stupid, and that's what a lot of people think that the IEP is you learn differently. And same thing with the ADHD stuff. So we did notice that having a routine was huge, and we, you know, red dye and all of that stuff, and any of the dyes and diet really affect ADHDers.
Oh, yes.
And we were very strict on that in the beginning. So talk a little bit more about when you, not just working with ADHD children in your school and the mental health struggle that COVID was, but you know, where did your passion really come in? Was it did you have some of that beforehand? Have you had ADHD issues of your own, or people that you know, and from prior to wanting to get out of the educational space and take on your own thing?
Yeah, so I definitely believe I have ADHD. I've never been diagnosed. Actually, when I started coaching, I asked my doctor, I'm like, I really believe that I have ADHD. Like, I've always been the space cadet in class, like on my report card. Like, this again was in the 90s, so ADHD wasn't really a thing back then. It would just say, oh, Kristina often zones out and she's more concerned about talking to her friends than completing her work. And yeah, that was totally me on like every report card, social butterfly. But it obviously I didn't have that formal diagnosis, but I still as an adult struggle with focusing and prioritizing tasks. And, you know, just when I try to do a task, I'll sit down, but then I'll do like 800 things at the same time I'm doing that task. So 100%, that certainly has to do with why I'm so passionate about this, because I really want to try to flip the script, because like you said, there is this stigma. Like, people think that people with ADHD are stupid and they just need more consequences and they're just badly behaved kids, but that's not it at all. I've worked with the most gifted kids with ADHD. It is a superpower. It has absolutely nothing to do with intelligence. An ADHD brain is like, they say it's like a Ferrari engine with bicycle brakes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh, that's a great explanation, because that's exactly what I am. You know, I am go, go, go. You know, like I mentioned, I have multiple businesses. I'm a handyman. I'm a voiceover actor, and I have my own 2 podcasts, and I run 6 other podcasts. So,
wow. That's amazing.
And I'm a full-time paramedic where every third day I go and serve my community. And, you know, a lot of us in the first responder world are ADHD, because that rush, you know, my favorite place when I worked in a hospital, my favorite place to work was the ER. You want to know why? Because I got that adrenaline rush every time something came in that was crazy. And it was this severe focus for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And then it was calm for a little bit. And then the next one, you know, and you know, my dopamine levels I loved working at the hospital until I got to the point where I'd come home and I could barely walk, because I'd walk 12 miles at the hospital. I mean, in a 12-hour shift.
Yeah.
As a respiratory therapist, yeah.
Absolutely. And to kind of piggyback off of that, yeah, people with ADHD have typically lower dopamine levels. So like you said, like we're always seeking out like excitement and thrill. So a lot of times with ADHD, I mean, there's 2 different types. There's the hyperactive, and then there's the inattentive, or there's the combined where you have both. But a lot of times with ADHD kids, they'll like poke at their sibling, or they're making a noise, or they'll do something that's quote unquote annoying, but it's really because they're trying to create their own excitement. You know, they have such low dopamine. So that makes so much sense. And that's amazing that, you know, you're just hang out with people with cardiac arrest, and it's.
Well, I'm calm. Like one of them, you know, so I didn't know what anxiety was until I got into the corporate world. You know, I deal with cardiac arrest. I deal with people with difficulty breathing. I deal with children being hurt. You know, everything. About childbirth. I've delivered my first baby a couple of months ago in my career. I've seen many births in the hospital setting, but as a paramedic, I actually delivered my first baby a couple months ago. And you know, it's one of those things where when I got into the corporate world, because of my background and my clinical side of things, and I was also in medical sales for a while as well. I got recruited to help develop new medical supplies, and it was very corporate. I went to an office, I sat in a cubicle, and about 3 months in, I look up and here I feel that the cubicle's coming in on me. And I'm like, to the point where I reached up and I grabbed it. And I'm like, oh, wait, I'm like, who's pushing the cubicle? No one. It was my brain and my anxiety because of all. And I finally had to quit that job and go back to the clinical space because that's where I'm more comfortable. Call it, knowing everything, or call it whatever you want to call it, calling it that rush. There wasn't that much. There were some good things that were happening, things I was helping develop, bring, and save lives in that other job. But I never had that adrenaline rush, and I was working 16, 70 hours a week, and coming home, eating dinner, putting my kids to bed, and getting back into my computer. And that's just not how I work. I need to have, as an ADHD or yourself, know that we have to have our downtime just as much as we have our uptime.
Oh, yes. Downtime is so, so important just to be able to rest our brains, because like they are Ferrari engines going and going.
Exactly. Yeah, and sometimes sleep isn't enough. Sometimes you just need a complete, dump. One thing I wanted to ask you about, and, share with me what you talk about with your parents when it comes to procrastination. I feel that ADHD, there's a built-in procrastination that happens to it, but then I've recently done a deep dive on procrastination, even with myself, and that'll actually get us into my sponsor here in a couple of minutes. But, my procrastination is its own superpower sometimes because I work so well under pressure. I procrastinate, I think, because when I'm like, okay, it really doesn't need to be done. There's no consequences if I don't do it until the last minute. If I get it done, and I've also noticed that there hasn't been any consequences yet with my procrastination because I get it done. There may be added stress, but talk a little bit about what you teach people when it comes to the procrastination factor of ADHD.
Absolutely. Have you ever heard of the Pomodoro theory?
I think I have. I couldn't recite it for you. But, yeah.
So one of the main things that I do when I work with parents is have them apply the Pomodoro theory, which is basically just setting a timer and just first you break down the tasks into small parts, because with ADHD brains, it can become very, very overwhelming. You tell an ADHD child to go do 3 things at once. They're not going to remember, the executive functions with the working memory. Like they're not going to remember. So one is chunking things into small parts. The Pomodoro theory is setting a timer for, and this can be adapted based on age, but they say like set a timer for 25 minutes, and literally for that 25 minutes, you're just going to focus on one task, right? But if it's a smaller child, it might be 10 minutes. Go do these 3 math problems in 10 minutes.
Right.
So timers, making checklists, and our dopamine. Yeah, when we check things off, it's such a dopamine hit, isn't it? Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and just, the ADHD brains, like I had mentioned before, just really thrive on structure and routine. So having visuals so that we can know and what to expect and know, like for a child, like I've designed morning routines for parents. So like get up, put on my clothes, brush my teeth, breakfast, and have that checklist somewhere visible, like in the child's bedroom or on the refrigerator or whatever. And then also have a checklist for the after school routine, because I'm sure that you've heard, and you've probably experienced this yourself, Kyle, the after school meltdown when you come home and you just pretty much fall apart.
Yeah, I do. That happens to me because I do a lot of training now. And so I'll go out there and I'll have this huge rush of training. And then I may train anywhere between 2 and 3 stations in my day. Actually, I go train on Monday. I train all day long. And I get back from training and I'll sit down finally, and not driving, like sit down and not have anything in front of me to do. And it's like, my friends are like, you literally, like, because when you live 24 hours at a medic house, you're allowed to sleep, you're allowed to sleep appropriately, right? And we have a living room, and we have couches, and we have, lazy boys and all the amenities of a house, because we live there for 24 hours in 121 days a year. So we have all the amenities, right? So I've had, and my wife will tell you this too, but I've been in the middle of a conversation and just fall asleep after a big day like that, right?
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah. You're
going and going.
Yeah. So, back to the whole, talking about, because some of the stuff you're saying, I'm like, I've lived it. I've gone through it with my son. I mean, that timer, and this is not a plug. This is not the sponsor, but I'm going to put a link into the timer that we used for Carter that we were suggested. And it's the visual timer. And it's got red like you turn it and it turns red. So when the red leaves and the red is gone, your time is up. And it's a great timer. It's a visual timer because most ADHDers too, they don't have a concept of what 5 minutes have been, what 10 minutes has been. They can see a visual clock of, oh, I've got a quarter of my clock left. And then it gets down to, oh, I've got this much of my clock left. Oh, I've got this much of my clock left. And people listening on the podcast and not watching it on YouTube, I was actually using my hands as the time shrank, but yeah, so the visual clock is huge. And I'm sure you tell your parents about the visual clock because it was a game changer for us.
Yeah, 100%. And, you can really just go online and just like type in timer and I understand what you mean by like the ones that have the colors.
Yeah.
Those are really, really helpful, especially if you can't tell time yet. But for parents who are listening, if you just literally like type in timer in Google, you can have that timer and have that screen set up right in front of your child's like working space.
Yeah. Exactly. And, that's one of the things that I really focused on with Carter was transition. So speak a little bit about, because what we found out that not only the plan. Yeah. So, and like I said, this is like two ADHD parents, one who actually created a course and helps parents and one who lived through it and actually knows exactly what she's teaching. And I wish you were around back then, because we learned the hard way, trial and error,
right, exactly.
But wait, I've learned all the things you're talking about. And one of them is we found out that with Carter and with me, and I'm sure with you, any of us ADHDers, we have a problem with transition.
Yes.
Because we hyper-focus, we want to get this done. And if it's not done and not done in the way that we like it, and we got to do something new, it's a meltdown to
100%,
transition.
100%. So do you want me to talk on transition?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so transitions are hard for every child, but with an ADHD brain, they are really, really hard. So meltdowns are very common. So one thing that you can do for transitions is really try to set clear expectations and have, set your kids up for success, like whatever the transition may be. Like, even if it's something like we're going to grandma's house for the Christmas party, there's going to be a lot of people there. And, just like really having that conversation about it might be loud. You might be overstimulated.
And we will eventually leave. So when you're finally having fun, you know that we got to leave. So when I come to you and tell you that we got to leave, don't have another meltdown, buddy.
Right. Exactly. And you know what? And also normalizing, like, it's okay to feel like overstimulated or angry or like nervous, just have a plan. Like maybe if your child needs like a stress ball to squeeze when they're in like a, high stimulating environment. Or a plan to go to a quiet space, right? Also, like, let's say the transition is, okay, we are now leaving elementary school and you're going to be in middle school next year. So one thing that I tell parents is 100% with your ADHD child, go visit the middle school, drive by, go meet the teachers,
walk through the
halls, show them where the cafeteria is and show them where everything is so that they're familiar. Yeah, but a lot of it is, and also visuals too. If you want to create a visual about, say, you're going on a trip with the family on a vacation and you want to just, remind the child, like what, or not remind them rather, but like set them up for success and let them know like what we're going to do first and what we're going to do next. And this might happen, and just it's just all about planning really and setting them up for success.
Right.
So yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this would be a good spot to put in the my sponsor. We'll talk about that for a couple of minutes, and we'll come back from the sponsor discussion, and we'll talk more about your entrepreneurial path inside and what happened when you actually made the transition. So right now, a little word from our sponsor. Let me ask you a question. Would your life be better if whatever you're struggling with, you could finally break free of? So what am I talking about? The Funky Five. What's the Funky Five, you ask? It's those oh-so-familiar struggles. Procrastination, people-pleasing, perfectionism, low self-confidence, and the one I call the big A, anxiety. For years, I struggled to manage my own version. I call them my funky 3. I had 3 of these funky 5 weighing me down. I've tried just about everything to deal with them. Then a guest on my podcast, Daniel Packard, shared with me a profound thought that I had never thought of. So Daniel, a UC Berkeley engineer, spent 8 years working with this team and over 3,000 people to create an approach that doesn't just help you manage these issues. It actually frees you from them by getting right to the root of what's holding you back. So after meeting with Daniel, I decided to give it a shot, and within 6 short weeks, gone. Truly gone. I was so amazed. The number one thing I was dealing with was procrastination. But miraculously, a deeper-rooted struggle with people-pleasing, something I'd been unknowingly battling for a lifetime, lifted entirely. And the anxiety that came with them both, gone as well. Are you tired of battling any of your funky 5s? People-pleasing, procrastination, perfectionism, low self-confidence, and the biggest happy killer of them all, the A word, anxiety. Imagine how much better life would be if you weren't just managing these things, but free of them, quickly, and yes, permanently. If you're ready for a real solution, head to danielpackard.com and get his free 90-minute training. Daniel himself will walk you through what makes his approach so different and teach you a technique you can use immediately to start feeling the difference. So if any of the funky 5, or maybe your own version of the funky 5, are holding you back, don't wait. Visit danielpackard.com. You can truly get results and start living the life you want. And we're back, and don't forget that funky 5 is real, and I lived the funky 5. 3 out of the funky 5 that I dealt with, I have now squashed, and please, 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 if you have any of the funky 5 that we talked about in that section there, go to Daniel's website and do the free evaluation. You won't regret it. I am a different person now, and I've literally squashed my procrastination to almost nil. My anxiety is completely gone, and my people pleasing, I'm still working on that one, but it's coming down. So back to Kristina and her program. Let's talk a little bit more about when you made the transition from being a teacher, because on Ignition Path, we always like to talk about the path that we got to our entrepreneurial ways. Talk about those days that you decided to leave the teaching industry and go full-time in this. What was involved with that? Was there any funky 5? Funky 5 is procrastination, anxiety, people-pleasing, self-doubt. Those are, one more, so that's the funky stuff that we all deal with as entrepreneurs when we make that switch. So talk a little bit about that switch.
Absolutely. So, I had spoke about how, I have my own ADHD tendencies. I guarantee that I would be diagnosed with ADHD if I, go and get a formal diagnosis. But with ADHD comes anxiety. ADHD and anxiety are very much, come hand in hand. And I've struggled with anxiety my entire life. And as a teacher and then moving into a school counselor, I worked in a very, very high needs school. I mean, I had to be trained on Narcan at an elementary school. Like it was really, really intense. And it was mainly for more the parents of the kids, but you
coming
never
in,
know.
dropping them off, and then
right.
being in their car after they drop their kid off. Yeah. Okay.
Right. I mean, I've been trained on an EpiPen as a teacher, but Narcan is
that's a whole other story.
Right. So I had my own anxiety. I literally had I'm not special. Everybody had mental health issues during the pandemic, but I was literally having kids write on Google Classroom, I'm going to kill myself. And then I wouldn't sleep that night.
How could you?
Right. Exactly. I'm the counselor of the school. And, in distance learning, it was very, very hard to get in touch with parents. And so, yes, I struggled with my own anxiety, which was part of my own burnout that led me to become an entrepreneur, which now is such a gift. But yes, at the time I had my own struggles. I was having panic attacks. I wasn't sleeping. And I'm like, why don't I just turn this into a thing? Like, I'm going to move into parent coaching. I'm going to help parents with my passion of ADHD. And that's how I got started. And I have not looked back since. It's been the best decision ever. And I don't think I'd go back to the school system ever.
Well, and that makes some sense. And I totally get what you're saying, because, we do know that there is flaws in our schooling systems right now, and
Yes.
and it needs a complete revamp. But for the people that are living it and like yourself and have seen their kids go through it, I'm lucky. My kids and I are really lucky that we're in one of the best school systems in all of Ohio, and some of the best grades. And yes, there was a little bit of struggle, but thank goodness Carter was on the back end of his high school career. It was only the last 3 months of his high school career that COVID hit. Now, my daughter, on the other hand, she was a freshman at the time, and that was a little bit different. When to get her back into the flow once school started up again the next year, that was a little different, and that hybrid stuff. But she's a completely different kid than Carter was too. She's not ADHD. She's very, focused. They're both very smart, but she's a female too. So she just has a drive to study and to not get distracted and all that. So she's not ADHD that I know of. I think she has some little bit of test anxiety, but who doesn't?
Right, right.
When you're nervous
Exactly.
about how important, nursing school is, but it's one of those things. So talk a little bit about how when you came over when you left that day that you made that decision, like, was it like, tell me what it was like. I think I know what it was like, but I want you to say it.
It was really scary.
Okay.
At first.
Well, there's that.
Yeah, but it was also really liberating.
The weight off your shoulder. Yeah.
Yes. I was like, because I thought I don't want to call working in a school like, being in prison, but like you said, that the school system, the public school system really, really needs a good revamp. I mean, kids literally are expected to sit there and sit still, which is so unrealistic. And, and that's why kids fall apart when they get home, right? Because they're like little sheep throughout the entire day. And like, we do this and then we do that and the bell rings and then I do this, like a robot. So that said, I couldn't have been happier to leave that environment and have the opportunity to serve others, but also work from the comfort of my home.
Yeah.
It's been great. Yeah.
Yeah. And get to know people and honestly, just like myself, when I help people with podcasting, I'm not stuck to the school itself and the people that are in that building,
Right.
and the parents that are in that building. I am global. You are
Right.
now global. You put out your message, you get someone that comes into your Facebook group or wherever you get your leads from for people that need help, and they could be a whole nother country.
I've worked with parents in Australia.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And that's
amazing.
that is true transformation of what we have to offer the world and our expertise and our passions.
Yeah.
And it's the world. It's no longer our own community. Don't get me wrong. I've got a couple of people that I help in my own community, and I would like more because I love in person meetups and education and teachings. But to be global like we are, I mean, what a blessing, right?
I know, it's such a gift. It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I never thought I really, like, when I went back to school to be a counselor, I just figured I would be in the public school system for 30 years and retire. Right. And so the pandemic, in a way, yes, it had a lot of its challenges, but it also provided a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, so, it really did. It really did. My handyman business exploded during the pandemic. I mean, it's because people were needing offices at home. They needed doors and walls built so they could have an office at home. So all of a sudden, I did like 6 or 7 room enclosures during the pandemic.
Wow, you're really a jack of all trades. You do everything.
Well, my dad, that kind of goes back into my upbringing. My dad was in construction. When I was old enough to swing a hammer, I would go to the sites with him, or they owned 26 properties back in the day, and I would go with him to fix things at the property. I just kind of learned it through. My mom and dad were both professionals, and my mom was, a multiple day, she wasn't a stay-at-home mom when by the time I came, I was the last of 4 and 10 years closest to my closest sibling. So, oops.
Oh, oopsie.
But, hey, best oops they ever had, right?
Right.
But it's one of those things where, I couldn't just stay at home. So dad was like, hey, come with me. You got to come with me because you're not old enough to stay at home or what have you. So I kind of learned that kind of stuff, through being around it, and then the main thing was when it came to my schooling and growing up, I wanted to mention this as well. I'm just, as I hear what you're saying and what you do for people, I'm so blessed and lucky that my mom and dad moved me to the Westerville school system back in first grade. And it's Westerville, Ohio is where I live. That's a school system that was advanced, better than, it was more advanced for the IEP, non-IEP, the learning disabled student back then. But even inside of that, I remember my 8th grade year, my 7th grade year, my science teacher came to me and said, "Hey, Kyle, we're putting together a new curriculum for science," which was one of my favorite subjects because it was hands-on. I understood it. It was almost like, engineering stuff, right?
Yes.
We're putting together a new thing. What would be called now the STEM program is what it was.
Oh,
so
wow.
Instead of learning about rockets, we built rockets. Instead of looking at pictures of anatomy, we dissected a fetal pig, which is 99% like our body when it comes to anatomy and what they have inside of it. So all these hands-on things. And that's once that happened, I became so interested in sciences. Sciences were never tough for me. They were exciting for me, even through high school, through college and all that. So if you're out there and STEM is a possibility for your ADHD student, try the STEM program because it's a different way of learning. See, like our school system has a whole separate building that all 4 high schools send students that want to be in STEM to that high school. It's a 5th high school, but it's built off of the other 4 high schools.
Wow.
And it's its own STEM. My son was in it for 1 year and did all kinds of great stuff. And it led him to the career center that led him to what he's doing now on a full-time basis. So it can start as early as that. Yeah.
Yeah. And for anyone listening that doesn't know what STEM is, it's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Yeah,
Yep.
Exactly. Fantastic.
Yes.
So tell us, we'll go ahead and wrap this up and just tell people how to get a hold of you, what services you provide. Of course, all the links will be below to get a hold of Kristina and find out if her services are what you need and what you would like to have. And I'm sure she gives some sort of free consultation. We all do.
Yes, I do. I do. So to find me, I have a Facebook group and Kyle's going to drop the links. I also have an Instagram and I'm calm__minds. My business is called Calm Minds. And my Facebook group, my goodness, I think it's Calm Minds, raising kids with ADHD or supporting kids with ADHD, but you'll see the link. I do offer a free consult. So please hop on if you have a child with ADHD or you suspect that they have ADHD. We can talk through that together. I do have a freebie. It's an ADHD guide for parents. And it will really, really help you understand your ADHD child's brain, as well as effective tools to support them at home.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Kristina. For those listeners out there, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to yet another episode of the Ignition Path podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share. Share meaning if you hear someone, you have a sister-in-law that you think has an ADHD child, or that may not go over. Like, hey, I think you need this. But in all seriousness, we had people contact us that were loved ones of ours and said, hey, have you ever thought about getting Carter diagnosed with ADHD? You could have some, there could be. We were totally against medication, so don't think if you get diagnosed with, that's another thing. Whoa. Yeah. Don't think if you have a child that may be diagnosed with ADHD, don't think that medication is the only answer, because it's not. We chose not to do medication and did the stuff that Kristina and I talked to, and we were able to manage my son very easily.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have a family member whose son is being diagnosed right now, and they're like, oh my gosh, but we're not putting our child on medication. Like, you don't have to.
You don't have to.
There's so many natural ways to support your ADHD child.
And take out all the dye. I wish that's one thing I wish that our food system could do, is get rid of all the dye. I would love that. But illegal. It's illegal in Europe to put dye in food.
I know. How is it not illegal here?
Right.
Oh, and ADHD brains need a lot of protein, just as a last tip.
Okay.
So,
good. All right.
Yeah.
See, I learned something new. Even though I lived through it, I didn't know that the protein was a huge factor. So.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Kristina, so much for coming on the Ignition Path podcast, and we'll talk to you real soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Ignition Path, fueling the entrepreneurial fire.